The morning sun cast a golden glow over the historic city of Stirling, Scotland.
Subscribe to my
The streets
channel.
buzzed with excitement as people lined up along the barriers, their phones ready to capture every moment. Word had spread that the Prince and Princess of Wales would be visiting the city for an official engagement at Stirling Castle. Security personnel had been preparing for days, ensuring every detail was perfect for the royal visit. Catherine stepped out of the royal car first, her elegant coat dress flowing gracefully as she waved to the crowd. William followed closely behind, his face lighting up with that familiar warm smile that had charmed people across the globe. The couple had been married for years now, and their chemistry remained as strong as ever. What most people didn't know was that behind the formal appearances and carefully planned schedules, William and Catherine shared a playful relationship that occasionally broke through their professional facade. The castle loomed magnificently. In the background, as the royal couple made their way through the welcoming committee, local officials stood in a neat line, each one rehearsing their greetings mentally. The Lord Lieutenant of Stirlingshire, dressed in his finest ceremonial uniform, waited at the front of the group. His name was Sir Robert Stirling, a descendant of one of Scotland's oldest families, and he took his duties very seriously. He had spent the entire previous evening practicing his bow and ensuring he knew exactly what to say. Catherine shook hands with the first few officials, her genuine interest in their work evident in her questions. She asked about local charities, community projects, and the history of the buildings they passed. William walked beside her, occasionally adding his own questions or comments. The couple had perfected this routine over countless engagements, moving in sync like dancers who had performed together for years. As they approached Sir Robert, something unexpected happened. A gust of wind swept through the courtyard, catching Catherine's coat dress. Without thinking, William reached out to help her, but in doing so, he accidentally stepped on the hem of her dress. Catherine stumbled slightly forward, grabbing William's arm for support. For a split second, the formal atmosphere cracked. William's eyes widened in horror at what he'd done, while Catherine's hand flew to her mouth, trying to suppress a laugh. Sir Robert, who had been mid-bow when this happened, froze in an awkward, half-bent position, unsure whether to continue his formal greeting or pretend he hadn't noticed. The other officials behind him held their breath, waiting to see how the royal couple would react. The crowd that had gathered nearby fell silent, hundreds of eyes watching this unscripted moment unfold. William looked at Catherine, his formal composure slipping. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he realized how ridiculous the situation must look. Catherine, still holding onto his arm, couldn't hold back any longer. A small giggle escaped her lips, quickly followed by another. The sound was so natural, so human, that it seemed to break a spell that had been cast over the entire gathering. What happened next would be talked about in Stirling for years to come. Instead of pretending nothing had happened or quickly moving past the moment, William leaned down and whispered something in Catherine's ear. Whatever he said made her laugh even harder, her shoulders shaking with genuine amusement. She playfully swatted his arm, and he responded by making an exaggerated apologetic face, placing both hands over his heart like a performer in a comedy show. Sir Robert remained frozen, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. He had spent his entire life around protocol and formality. Royal visits followed strict patterns. There were rules, procedures, and expected behaviors. This moment of spontaneous playfulness didn't fit into any category he understood. Should he laugh along? Should he maintain his serious expression? Should he finish his bow or stand up straight? His mind raced through decades of training, but none of it had prepared him for this. The other officials behind Sir Robert began exchanging quick glances with each other. Some smiled uncertainly, while others maintained their professional expressions, waiting for a cue about how to react. The crowd, however, had no such hesitation. A wave of delighted laughter rippled through the gathered spectators. People began calling out good-natured comments, and someone shouted, "Don't worry, Your Highness. Happens to the best of us." William, hearing this, turned to the crowd and gave a theatrical shrug, his hands spread wide as if to say, "What can you do?" This gesture earned him an even bigger laugh from the onlookers. Catherine, now recovered from her stumble, stood beside him, her face glowing with happiness. She turned to Sir Robert, who still hadn't quite figured out what to do with himself, and extended her hand warmly. "I'm so sorry about that," Catherine said, her voice carrying a musical quality that came from genuine amusement. "My husband seems to think he's dancing partner rather than a walking companion." Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she glanced back at William. William clutched his chest in mock offense. "I was trying to help. The wind was quite strong, and I thought you needed assistance." He paused, then added with perfect comic timing, "I may have miscalculated slightly." This exchange seemed to finally give Sir Robert permission to relax. His serious expression cracked, and a smile spread across his weathered face. He straightened up from his awkward half-bow and let out a chuckle. "Your Royal Highnesses, welcome to Stirling. I must say, this is certainly the most memorable royal greeting I've ever been part of." The ice had been broken in the most unexpected way, and the atmosphere in the castle courtyard transformed completely. What had begun as a formal, somewhat stiff official engagement suddenly felt more like a friendly gathering. Sir Robert, now fully recovered from his initial shock, found himself genuinely enjoying the company of the royal couple, rather than simply enduring his ceremonial duties. Catherine straightened her coat dress and smoothed down the hem that William had stepped on. She made a show of inspecting it carefully, turning to examine the back, which made William lean over exaggeratedly to help her check. "Any damage?" he asked with exaggerated concern. "Should we call for emergency tailoring services?" Sir Robert watched this interaction with growing amazement. He had met members of the royal family before, of course. There had been formal dinners, official ceremonies, and carefully choreographed events. But he had never witnessed anything quite like this casual, affectionate banter. The prince and princess seemed completely comfortable making light of themselves, unconcerned with maintaining a perfect image every single moment. "I think it will survive," Catherine declared, giving the dress a final pat. She turned back to Sir Robert with a warm smile. "Now, shall we try this again? I promise to watch where I'm walking this time, and William promises to watch where he's stepping." "I make no such promise," William interjected quickly, earning him a playful elbow from Catherine. The officials who had been standing in line behind Sir Robert had completely abandoned their formal postures now, many of them grinning openly at the exchange, as the group began moving toward the castle entrance. Sir Robert fell into step beside William. The prince asked him about the history of Stirling Castle, and Sir Robert launched into an explanation about the structure's role in Scottish history. Catherine walked slightly ahead with the castle's curator, asking questions about recent restoration work. Every few moments, William would catch Catherine's eye, and they would exchange a look that spoke of years of shared private jokes and understanding inside the castle's great hall. Preparations had been made for a formal presentation about local community initiatives. Rows of chairs faced a small stage where several local leaders would speak about their projects. The room was filled with carefully selected guests, all dressed in their finest clothes, all sitting up straight with nervous excitement about meeting the royal couple. William and Catherine were shown to two ornate chairs at the front of the room. As they sat down, Catherine's chair made a loud creaking noise that echoed through the hall. She froze, her eyes going wide. William looked at her, then at the chair, then back at her face. Without saying a word, he slowly began to rise from his own chair, then sat back down hard, making it creak even louder. The sound echoed through the now silent hall. Sir Robert, who had been about to begin his introduction, stopped mid-sentence. He stared at William, unsure if the prince had just deliberately made his chair creak. Catherine had both hands pressed to her mouth now, her shoulders shaking with silent laughter. William maintained a perfectly innocent expression, as if nothing unusual had happened. The audience sat in stunned silence for approximately 3 seconds. Then someone in the back row started laughing. The sound was quickly picked up by others, and within moments, the entire room erupted in laughter. William stood up again, this time testing his chair carefully, making it creak several more times while nodding seriously, as if conducting an important structural analysis. "I believe we've found a design flaw," he announced solemnly to Sir Robert, though his eyes were dancing with amusement. "These chairs may need some maintenance." Catherine had given up trying to maintain her composure and was laughing openly now, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "Sir Robert, who had begun the day determined to run a perfectly proper royal engagement, found himself laughing harder than he had in years. His carefully prepared speech, which he had memorized word for word, was completely forgotten. Instead, he found himself saying, "Perhaps we should bring in the royal furniture inspector." "An excellent idea," William agreed seriously. "Catherine, make a note of that, would you?" Catherine, still laughing, pretended to write something in an imaginary notebook. "One royal furniture inspector," she said, her voice still shaking with laughter. "Should we specify that they need experience with creaky chairs, or is that assumed?" The entire hall was now in uproar. People were wiping tears from their eyes, and the formal atmosphere had completely evaporated. What should have been a serious presentation about community work had turned into something much more memorable. The local leaders who were supposed to give presentations found themselves relaxing, realizing that they didn't need to be quite so nervous about impressing the royal couple. As the laughter finally began to subside, William and Catherine were offered different chairs, which they tested carefully before sitting down, making a show of bouncing slightly to check for creaks. This additional comedy routine earned them another round of chuckles from the audience. Sir Robert, now completely won over by the couple's warmth and humor, had abandoned his prepared remarks entirely, was speaking from the heart about the community projects they were about to hear about. The first presenter, a young woman named Margaret who ran a youth center in one of Stirling's more challenged neighborhoods, approached the small stage with visible nervousness. She clutched her notes with white knuckles, and her voice shook slightly as she began to speak. Catherine noticed immediately and leaned forward in her chair. Giving the young woman her full attention with an encouraging smile, Margaret began, describing her work with teenagers who had struggled in traditional school settings. As she spoke about the challenges and successes, William asked several questions that showed he had been listening carefully. His questions weren't the formal, scripted ones that Margaret had expected. Instead, he asked about specific young people she had mentioned, about what surprised her most in her work, about the moments that kept her motivated. Catherine added her own questions, and soon Margaret forgot to be nervous. She found herself having a real conversation rather than delivering a rehearsed presentation. She even made a joke about one of the teenagers, who had initially refused to participate in any activities, but now couldn't be kept away from the center. William laughed genuinely at the story, and Catherine asked for more details about how they had managed that transformation. The presentations continued, each one becoming more relaxed and conversational than the last. A man who operated a food bank spoke about the growing need in the community. An elderly woman described her literacy program for adults who had never learned to read. A father talked about his support group for parents of children with special needs. Each presenter found themselves speaking to William and Catherine as if they were friends who genuinely cared, rather than distant royal figures going through the motions of an official visit. During the food bank presentation, the operator mentioned that they had recently received a donation of what he called the world's ugliest teapot collection from an elderly woman who had passed away. He explained that they had no idea what to do with dozens of peculiarly designed teapots, some shaped like chickens, others like houses, and one that appeared to be modeled after a famous politician's head. William's eyes lit up with interest. "Did you say a teapot shaped like a politician?" he asked. The food bank operator nodded, smiling. "Which politician?" William wanted to know. When told it was a prime minister from several decades ago, William turned to Catherine. "We should start a collection," he said seriously. "Every prime minister deserves to be immortalized in teapot form." Catherine raised an eyebrow at him. "And where exactly would we display this collection?" she asked. "Perhaps in your study?" William considered this for a moment. "Actually, that's not a bad idea. It would make meetings much more interesting. Imagine negotiating important matters while pouring tea from a politician's head." The room erupted in laughter again. Sir Robert, watching from the side, shook his head in amazement. He had been involved in royal visits for over 20 years, and he had never seen anything like this. The Prince and Princess of Wales were supposed to be formal, distant, perfectly controlled, yet here they were, joking about teapot collections and making everyone in the room feel like they were part of an inside joke. After the presentations concluded, There was supposed to be a brief tour of the castle followed by a formal lunch. However, William had other ideas. He asked Sir Robert if it would be possible to visit the youth center that Margaret had spoken about. Sir Robert looked panicked for a moment, consulting with security personnel and schedulers. The request wasn't on the official itinerary. There were concerns about security preparations and timing. Catherine joined the conversation, her diplomatic skills smoothing over the logistical concerns. She suggested that they could shorten the castle tours and skip the formal lunch, grabbing something simple instead. William nodded enthusiastically. "I've been to many formal lunches," he said to Sir Robert with a smile, "but I haven't seen Margaret's youth center, and I'd very much like to." The hastily arranged visit to the youth center created a flurry of activity among the security team and local officials. Phone calls were made, routes were planned, and the youth center received approximately 15 minutes of warning that the Prince and Princess of Wales were about to arrive. Margaret, who had just returned to the center after the presentation, went pale when she received the call. The building wasn't prepared for a royal visit. There were art projects scattered across tables, sports equipment piled in corners, and the remains of someone's lunch still sitting in the common room. William and Catherine arrived to find a group of teenagers standing outside the building, clearly having been instructed to wait there by staff members who were frantically tidying inside. The teenagers ranged in age from about 13 to 17, and they all wore expressions of studied disinterest that poorly concealed their curiosity. One boy had his arms crossed, trying to look tough. A girl with bright purple hair was examining her fingernails as if they were far more interesting than any royal visitors. "Hello, everyone," Catherine said warmly as she approached the group. "I hope you don't mind us dropping by unexpectedly." The teenagers mumbled various greetings, still maintaining their cool facades. William looked at the building, then at the group. "So, are we allowed to go in, or are you staging some kind of protest?" he asked with a perfectly straight face. The boy with crossed arms blinked in surprise. "What?" "No, they told us to wait out here while they cleaned up," he said before he could stop himself. Then, realizing he had probably revealed something he shouldn't have, he looked worried. William grinned. "Ah, so they're hiding all the evidence of actual teenagers being here. Makes sense. Can't have the place looking like it's actually used, can we?" This broke the ice immediately. Several of the teenagers laughed, and the purple-haired girl looked up from her fingernails with interest. "They've probably hidden all our art projects," she said. "Some of them are pretty weird." Catherine's face lit up. "I love weird art. What's the weirdest thing you've made recently?" What followed was not at all what Sir Robert had expected when he had reluctantly agreed to this unscheduled visit. Instead of a quick walkthrough with photo opportunities, William and Catherine ended up spending over an hour at the youth center. They looked at the art projects that the teenagers pulled out from where staff members had hastily hidden them. They tried their hand at the video game setup that one of the boys insisted they had to see. They sat at a table covered with someone's half-finished homework and heard about the tutoring program. The purple-haired girl, whose name was Sophie, had created a series of portraits of famous historical figures reimagined as modern teenagers. She showed Catherine one of Queen Victoria wearing a hoodie and headphones, looking annoyed. Catherine studied it carefully. "This is brilliant," she said genuinely. "The expression is perfect. She looks exactly like she's been asked to pause her music to listen to something she doesn't want to hear." Sophie beamed at the praise, her cool facade completely forgotten. "Do you think she would have been into music if she'd lived now?" she asked. Catherine considered this seriously. "I think she would have had very strong opinions about it, whatever it was." She had strong opinions about everything. William, who had been looking at the other portraits, called over. "Sophie, have you considered doing the royal family?" Sophie's eyes went wide. "I didn't think. Would that be okay?" William shrugged. "Why not? I'd be very curious to see what you'd come up with. Though I warn you, I'd probably end up wearing something embarrassing knowing my luck with clothes in your imagination." Sophie laughed, already clearly thinking about possibilities. "Can I really?" she asked, looking between William and Catherine. "I'd be honored," Catherine assured her. "Send them to Margaret, and she can pass them along." Across the room, the boy who had started with his arms crossed was now showing William the youth center's music studio. It was a small room with second-hand equipment, but the boy, whose name was Danny, spoke about it with reverence. He explained how he'd been excluded from school for fighting, how he'd been angry all the time, and how making music had given him a way to express everything he felt without hurting anyone. William listened intently as Danny played him a track he'd been working on. It was raw and emotional, the lyrics dealing with feelings of abandonment and anger. When it finished, William didn't offer empty praise. Instead, he said, "That's powerful. You can hear the genuine emotion in it. Have you thought about what you want to do with your music?" The conversation between William and Danny continued, delving into the challenges of pursuing creative careers and the importance of having support systems. Danny admitted that he'd never thought about music as a real career possibility, assuming it was just a hobby. William shared stories about people he knew who had turned their passions into careers, emphasizing that it required hard work and dedication but was possible. Catherine, meanwhile, had gathered a small group of the younger teenagers and was hearing about their experiences at the center. A 13-year-old girl named Aisha spoke about how coming to the center after school meant she had a safe place to go, while her mother worked 2 jobs. She described how Margaret had helped her with her homework, how she'd made friends, and how she'd discovered she loved painting. "Can I show you my favorite painting?" Aisha asked shyly. Catherine nodded enthusiastically, and Aisha led her to a wall where several canvases were displayed. She pointed to a vibrant, abstract piece filled with swirls of color. "It's supposed to be how happiness feels," Aisha explained. Catherine studied it carefully. "I can see that," she said softly. "The colors seem to move and dance. It reminds me of that feeling when something wonderful happens unexpectedly." Margaret watched all of this unfold with a mixture of joy and disbelief. The royal couple had transformed what could have been a brief, formal visit into genuine connections with the young people she worked with every day. They weren't just going through the motions or posing for photos. They were actually engaging, listening, and responding with real interest and warmth. Sir Robert, who had accompanied them to the youth center, stood near the doorway, observing everything. His initial confusion at the morning's playful moments had evolved into something like understanding. He realized that William and Catherine's willingness to be spontaneous, to laugh at themselves, and to drop formality when appropriate, wasn't a lack of respect for their roles. Instead, it was what made them effective in those roles. Their playfulness had disarmed everyone they met, creating space for authentic interactions. As the visit to the youth center began to wind down, William noticed a small stage area at one end of the main room. "What's that used for?" he asked Margaret. She explained that they occasionally had talent shows where the young people could perform for each other. "When's the next one?" Catherine wanted to know. Margaret checked her calendar. "Actually, we have one scheduled for next month." William and Catherine exchanged one of their meaningful looks. "We might not be able to attend," William said, "but perhaps we could send a video message to be played at the beginning." Margaret's face showed that she could barely believe what she was hearing. "That would be incredible," she managed to say. Catherine pulled out her phone. "Why wait? Let's record one now." What followed was several minutes of William and Catherine attempting to record a video message while various teenagers offered increasingly ridiculous suggestions about what they should say. Sophie insisted they should do it in funny voices. Danny said they should make it rhyme. Aisha thought they should include a dance. The resulting video was a cheerful, slightly chaotic message that bore no resemblance to any formal royal address, but perfectly captured the spirit of the center and the energy of the young people there. When it was finally time to leave, the teenagers who had initially tried to look unimpressed were now crowding around to say goodbye. Sophie promised to work on her royal family portraits. Danny said he would send Margaret some of his music to share. Aisha asked if they could send Catherine a photo of her next painting. William and Catherine promised to look forward to all of it. As they walked back to their car, Sir Robert accompanied them. He had abandoned all pretense of formal protocol at this point. "Your Royal Highnesses," he said, "I must confess, this has been the most unusual royal visit I've ever been part of." William smiled. "Unusual in a good way or a bad way?" Sir Robert laughed. "In the best way possible. I've seen royal visits that were perfectly executed according to protocol, but felt empty. Today was messy and spontaneous and completely unplanned in parts, but it was real. Catherine squeezed William's hand. "That's what we were hoping for," she said. "These visits mean more when we can actually connect with people, not just perform for them." William nodded. "Plus, it's much more fun when you're not worried about keeping everything perfectly proper all the time." Sir Robert shook his head with a smile. "Well, you certainly kept me on my toes. I don't think I'll ever forget the moment you stepped on the princess's dress, or when you both started testing those chairs, the drive back through Stirling's. Streets showed that word of the visit had spread. More people lined the roads now, waving and smiling. Some held signs thanking them for visiting the youth center. Margaret had clearly already shared what had happened on social media, because several signs specifically mentioned the teapot collection joke and the chair incident. In the days that followed, Sir Robert found himself recounting the story of the visit to anyone who would listen. He described the moment when William stepped on Catherine's dress and how the formal atmosphere had dissolved into genuine laughter. He talked about how their playfulness had set everyone at ease and created space for real conversations. He explained how their spontaneous decision to visit the youth center had meant more to those teenagers than a dozen carefully planned formal events ever could. The story spread throughout Stirling and beyond. People who had been there shared their own perspectives on social media. Photos and videos from the day went viral, not because they showed perfect royal moments, but because they captured something authentic. They showed a couple who could laugh at themselves, who valued real connections over perfect appearances, and who understood that sometimes the best moments are the unplanned ones. Sir Robert, who had started the day speechless with confusion at the unexpected playfulness, ended it speechless with admiration for what that playfulness had accomplished.